March 2nd, 2026, 3:47 UTC-4, Caracas. They won't know what hit them until it's too late. The words were spoken by the NSA's Deputy Director of Cyber Operations in a windowless room in the basement of Fort Meade, Maryland, 17 days earlier. They were not a prediction, they were a confirmation. The name of the operation had been chosen 6 months earlier, Operation Anaconda Digital, not for drama, but for technical precision. Like the South American serpent that compresses its prey until complete asphyxiation, the operation was designed to systematically strangle each layer of the Venezuelan defense architecture until only silence remained. Strategic contextualization. The Venezuela of 2026 represented a geopolitical inflection point. After 3 years of military rapprochement with rival powers, the country had become a hub for foreign intelligence operations in the Western Hemisphere. Chinese Type 609 radar systems monitored air movements from the Colombian border to the Caribbean. Russian advisors operated electronic warfare facilities at La Orcaila. Critical infrastructure had been deliberately isolated from Western networks. The main target was not an individual, but a system, the Bolivarian Integrated Air Defense Network RIDAB, a complex of 47 radar installations, 12 command and control centers, and approximately 280 anti-aircraft defense platforms distributed across Venezuelan territory. RIDAB was not just a defensive capability, it was the backbone that allowed the Caracas regime to operate with impunity in its own airspace while providing cover for third-party activities. The decision to neutralize it was taken at a National Security Council meeting on January 14, 2026. Following the interception of communications confirming the transfer of hypersonic missile technology to Venezuelan facilities, the operation would be carried out without firing a single kinetic missile. The weapon would be code. Recognition and penetration. The reconnaissance phase had begun 22 months earlier. NSA tailored Axis operations TAO teams, operating under diplomatic and commercial cover, mapped every node of the Venezuelan military communications infrastructure, every Huawei router, every ZTE switch, each Dell server inherited from previous contracts with Western suppliers. The entry point was identified in April 2024, a firmware update system for Chinese-supplied J-27 radars, which relied on time synchronization servers located in Make It A. Engineers from PLA Unit 61398 had configured the system with default credentials that had never changed. The first backdoor was installed on June 11, 2024 at 4:33 UTC during an automated maintenance routine. Over the following months, penetration expanded in layers. Firmware implants were introduced into 38 of the 47 radar systems. Persistent Trojans were installed in all 12 command centers. Passive listening tools mapped communication patterns between operators, shifts, emergency protocols, and backup procedures. As of December 2025, the NSA has root access to 91% of RIDAB's critical infrastructure. They knew that Colonel Gustavo Morales, commander of the Tactical Operations Center in Maracay, had coffee at 6:15 every morning. They knew that the backup system in Valencia had a diesel generator with recurring failure that the operators ignored. They knew that the password for the network administrator of the Central Command in Caracas was Bolivar 2023. Coordinated execution. March 2, 2026. 3:47 UTC-4. The first malicious packet was transmitted via commercial satellite Intelsat 21, bounced through a point of presence in Curacao. No Venezuelan firewall detected it as anomalous. It was identical in structure to the legitimate time synchronization packets that the system received 17 times a day. At 3:49, J-27 of radars in Boquizamito, Barcelona, and Puerto Cabello began reporting ghost targets. Not dozens, hundreds. Operators, trained to filter interference, initiated recalibration protocols. It was exactly as expected. At 3:52, encrypted communication systems based on the Russian Alpha 16 GM protocol at 9 facilities was silently rerouted through NSA-controlled nodes. Messages continued to be delivered. Operators did not realize that each command was being mirrored in real time to analysts at Fort Meade. At 3:55, an urgent firmware update was automatically distributed to all radars connected to the network. The message came from legitimate Chinese servers, compromised 6 weeks earlier. No operator questioned it. Urgent updates were common. The uploaded firmware contained a 47 kilobyte payload that would disable critical detection function 72 hours later, but immediately activate additional backdoors. At 4:03, Central Command in Caracas detected the first anomalies. Brigadier General HCTR Villegas ordered the activation of contingency protocols. Your orders have been transmitted, received, and ignored. Not because of insubordination, but because the routing systems had been reconfigured to discard any commands that contained specific keywords previously identified by the NSA's language analysis. At 4:11, operators in Valencia attempted to switch to the backup system. The diesel generator with a known fault was activated. It ran for 90 seconds before going into overload. It was not physical sabotage. It was the result of months of mapping out exactly which equipment would fail under stress and ensuring that that stress was applied at the precise moment. At 4:18, the RIDAP network was completely blind. 47 radars reporting inconsistent or no data. 12 command centers unable to coordinate response. 280 anti-aircraft platforms awaiting orders that would never come. Domain of informational space simultaneously. A second layer of the operation was performed. At 3:50, botnets activated weeks earlier began distributed denial of service DDoS attacks against Venezuelan civil communications infrastructure, not to destroy, but to create noise. Internet providers in Caracas, Maracaibo, and Valencia reported severe service degradation. At 4:05, dormant social media accounts, created over 3 years and operated by CENTCOM contractors, began posting videos and images of alleged military blackouts and unauthorized troop movements. The content was fabricated but technically plausible. Recommendation algorithms organically amplified posts. At 4:22, Venezuelan state television channels suffered brief but coordinated interruptions, not long enough to cause panic, but long enough to sow doubt. The Ministry of Communications issued an official statement at 4:40 denying any compromise of defense systems. The statement was issued through compromised infrastructure, allowing NSA analysts to confirm in real time that Venezuelan High Command did not yet understand the extent of the penetration, consequences, and closure at 5:30 UTC-4. The active phase of Operation Digital Anaconda concluded. No aircraft had crossed Venezuelan airspace. No missiles had been fired. No soldiers had crossed the border. Venezuela had been strategically blinded without a single act of conventional war being committed. Over the next 72 hours, Venezuelan radar systems began to permanently fail due to installed firmware payloads. Attempts to restore from backups failed because the backups had been silently corrupted weeks earlier. Chinese technicians were summoned, but without access to the compromised infrastructure, their diagnosis was inconclusive. On March 9th, Venezuela publicly announced a planned modernization of its air defense systems. No mention of cyber compromise was made. In private, intercepted communications revealed institutional panic. The Minister of Defense was replaced on March 12th. 6 high-ranking officers were removed. Venezuela's integrated air defense capability was reduced by approximately 73% over a period of 8 weeks. During this interval, reconnaissance aircraft operated with impunity along the borders. Human intelligence assets were exfiltrated without interference. Operations that had been planned for years were carried out in a permissive environment. Final state operation Digital Anaconda has not been publicly disclosed. There was no press conference. There was no detailed congressional briefing. Defense analysts speculated about Venezuelan technical failures and systemic incompetence. Few have considered the possibility of a coordinated cyber operation of this magnitude. At Fort Meade, the operations room was dismantled on March 15th. The servers have been degaussed. Reports were classified as tiers or SUR with additional compartmentalization restrictions. The teams were dispersed to other operations. There was no celebration. What remained was the absolute certainty that, for 127 minutes in the early hours of March 2nd, 2026, airspace of a sovereign nation had ceased to exist as a defensible domain, not by conquest, but by code, not by force, but by knowledge. And when the world woke up that morning, nothing seemed to have changed, but everything had been reorganized.